The low thrum of the club's bass was a distant murmur in the VIP section, a secluded sanctuary of leather sofas and muted lighting. Li Wei sat with three of his top friends, the city's business tycoons, a glass of amber liquid in his hand. The conversation was all business, cold and calculating, with no room for a smile on Li Wei's face. "I'm telling you, Li Wei," Chen, one of his friends, said with a smirk. "The new head of my sales department is a shark. Completely ruthless." "Ruthless is an asset, not a flaw," Li Wei replied, his voice calm and even. Another friend, Hao, leaned forward, a glint in his eyes. "Speaking of assets, have you seen the new waiter they have here? Blonde hair, green eyes. He looks so young and innocent. I think I'll make an offer to keep him on my payroll." The conversation continued to flow, but Li Wei's attention was now elsewhere. He dismissed the thought, but a part of him was intrigued. As if on cue, a waiter came to their table with a new bottle of wine. Then another. And then a third, tall and handsome with a shock of blonde hair. Li Wei's hand froze, the glass halfway to his lips. He recognized him. It was a year ago. A formal charity gala, a sea of black ties and silk dresses. Li Wei was moving through the crowd, a glass of red wine in his hand, when a clumsy waiter, barely out of his teens, stumbled and missed a step. The waiter, panicking, tried to catch himself, but only managed to crash into Li Wei. The glass of red wine went flying, a scarlet stain blooming across the front of Li Wei's custom-made suit. "Watch where you're going," Li Wei had said, his voice as cold as ice. The waiter was a blur of apologies, his hands trembling as he reached out to wipe the wine. But Li Wei had pushed him away, his words like daggers. "Don't touch me." He had walked away, leaving the frightened waiter with the stain of his own fear on his pristine white shirt. The waiter's manager, a terrified man who knew of Li Wei's power, had fired him on the spot. But since that moment, the image of the young man's tear-filled eyes had been burned into Li Wei's memory. He'd often found himself thinking about that night, wishing he had handled the situation with more grace, a pang of something akin to regret stirring in his chest. Now, seeing Xiao Han standing there, looking exactly as he had a year ago, was a shock. But hearing his friend talk about him with such casual, possessive desire, a different kind of anger coiled in Li Wei's stomach. He would keep him. Not for a moment, not for a night, but for as long as he could. As he carried the heavy tray of wine bottles, Xiao Han was a whirlwind of nerves and practiced calm. He had heard the whispers, the club was owned by one of the top-tier alphas of the city, and the most powerful men in China gathered here twice a month. He had taken this job hoping to find an opportunity to charm one of them into giving him a chance. He straightened his shoulders, putting on what he hoped was a seductive smile and a calm demeanor. He served the first man, a quiet tycoon with a serious expression, and then the next, giving a little smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. He saw the way their gazes lingered, and it fueled his confidence. He was good at this. The other guy went to serve Li Wei. As he moved to Hao, the man who had been talking about him earlier, Hao's fingers subtly brushed against his hand as he took his glass. A shiver ran up Xiao Han's arm, and he almost dropped the bottle. He quickly composed himself, quivering just for a moment, and turned to serve the final guest, Choi. But before he could, a low, commanding voice cut through the air. "You," Li Wei said, his gaze fixed on Xiao Han. "Come here and serve me." Xiao Han's heart skipped a beat. This was the one who owned the club. The most powerful of them all. He moved to Li Wei's side, his focus absolute. He bent to pour the wine, his hands steady, his mind screaming at him not to make a single mistake. And then, his foot caught on a stray rug. The bottle tipped, the liquid surging from the neck, and in a slow-motion nightmare, it splashed across Li Wei's crisp, white shirt. Li Wei's face, a second ago an unreadable mask of power, contorted into a furious scowl. The angry fire in his dark eyes, the way his jaw tightened, the disgust that crossed his face as the cold liquid soaked his clothes. In that instant, Xiao Han's memories from a year ago came flooding back, clear as day. The formal gala, the panicked crash, the cold voice saying, "Don't touch me." This wasn't just a man. This was the clean freak who got him fired, the one whose angry face had haunted him ever since. He was in the lion's den after all, and he had just spilled a drink on the lion. Again. Xiao Han's heart hammered against his ribs. The silence in the VIP room was deafening, broken only by his own frantic voice. I am so sorry. I'm sorry. I'll replace it. I'll buy you a new shirt, he stammered, his body trembling from head to toe. But even as the words left his lips, a cold dread set in. He knew who this man was. He knew this wasn't a simple shirt. It was a one-of-a-kind, limited edition outfit. It would cost more than he could ever make. His 5 years' worth of salary at the club wouldn't be enough to pay for even a quarter of it. He felt tears welling up in his eyes, hot and stinging with a mixture of fear and humiliation. Li Wei's voice was a low rumble, devoid of any anger, which was somehow more terrifying. "This outfit," he said, his eyes fixed on Xiao Han, "cost me $40 million. Xiao Han's breath hitched. 40 million. He was a dead man. He sank to his knees, his mind racing for an alternative, a way out that didn't involve a lifetime of debt. I can't pay you. Please, I'll do anything. Punish me in a different way. Please," he pleaded, his voice breaking. Li Wei leaned forward, his hands clasped on the table. A chilling smirk played on his lips. "Anything," he asked, his voice almost a whisper. "Then consider your debt settled. You will work for me as my personal assistant. You will be in charge of all my coffee and drinks at both my home and my office until I deem your debt to be repaid." A glimmer of hope flickered in Xiao Han's eyes. It was a job. A way to live. Yes. Thank you, sir. But, would I get a little salary for upkeep?" Li Wei's face was unreadable. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a key, placing it on the table. "You will not. You will move into my home. All your living expenses will be taken care of, so you will have no reason to focus on anything but your work serving me. Consider it part of your repayment." The air was thick with the weight of the offer. It was a golden cage, a life without freedom. Xiao Han opened his mouth to protest, to say something, anything else. But Li Wei cut him short. "Your shift ends in 1 hour. Your driver will be waiting outside. Come prepared. You start tomorrow." Li Wei's declaration hung in the air, a silent command that left his friends stunned. How, the friend who first spoke of Xiao Han, was the first to break the silence. "You're not serious," he said, a look of pure disbelief on his face. "You're hiring him to be your coffee boy?" Li Wei's declaration hung in the air, a silent command that left his friends stunned. How, the friend who first spoke of Xiao Han, was the first to break the silence. "You're not serious," he said, a look of pure disbelief on his face. "You're hiring him to be your coffee boy?" Chen, who had been talking about his new head of sales, forced a laugh. Only you would find a way to make a simple punishment into a grand gesture, Li Wei. He leaned back, his eyes narrowing as he looked at Xiao Han, who was still frozen with fear. Don't let it get to your head, kid. He's a collector. You're just the newest piece. Li Wei ignored them, his focus entirely on Xiao Han. The other friends exchanged glances, understanding that the conversation was over. They knew better than to question Li Wei when he had made a decision. He was not a man to be trifled with. A moment later, Li Wei's personal bodyguard stepped into the room. The car is ready, sir. Li Wei nodded, then turned to Xiao Han. My driver will take you home. Pack only what you need. You will resume work at my home at 8 a.m. tomorrow. Without another word, he dismissed the club staff, leaving the two of them alone in the quiet tension of the VIP room. The next morning, Xiao Han found himself at the doorstep of Li Wei's sprawling penthouse. The driver had left him with a curt instruction and a knowing look, a silent warning. He was a new piece in a very large and very dangerous game. The day at the office was a whirlwind of tension. When Li Wei was away in a meeting, the employees, a sharp-looking and perfectly professional group, would cast him furtive glances. He could feel their whispers, their judgment, and their curiosity. The secretary, a woman with a face carved from stone, treated him like he was invisible, handing him files and tasks with a cold efficiency that made it clear she disapproved of his presence. But the moment Li Wei returned, the entire office would shift. The atmosphere would become rigid and hushed, the employees working with a frantic, silent focus. And Li Wei's eyes would be on Xiao Han. He would summon him with a single gesture, and Xiao Han would find himself doing everything. He would be his coffee boy, making Li Wei's favorite blend of coffee just the way he liked it, his hands trembling as he carried the expensive china cup to his desk. He would be his errand boy, picking up files from other departments, his mind racing to find the right room without getting lost. He would be his assistant, arranging meetings, organizing his schedule, and 100 other tasks that were far beyond his experience. With Li Wei in the room, the tension was suffocating. He watched Xiao Han with a chilling focus, his eyes following his every move as if he were a delicate item he had just purchased. He didn't speak to him unless it was to give a direct order, and when he did, his voice was a low command that brooked no argument. It was a suffocating, terrifying existence, and it was only the first day. The penthouse was a gilded cage, silent and vast. After his first terrifying day, Xiao Han was a nervous wreck, the heavy silence of the night only amplifying his fear. He sat on the edge of the plush bed in the guest room, every sound from the hallway making him jump. He wondered if this was all a test, if his boss was just waiting for him to make a mistake. The call came around 10. A simple, low command from Li Wei. My quarters. Now. Xiao Han's heart pounded in his chest. He made his way down the long hallway to Li Wei's private suite. The room was even more opulent than his own, the lights low, casting a soft glow. Li Wei was seated on the edge of his bed, his face calm and unreadable. He gestured to the floor in front of him. My shoulders. They're tight. Dread mixed with a strange kind of thrill. This wasn't work. This was something else. Xiao Han knelt behind him, his hands trembling as they touched the solid, muscular expanse of Li Wei's back. The skin was warm under his fingertips, and he found himself mesmerized by the quiet rise and fall of Li Wei's breathing. He worked the knots out of his shoulders, his thumbs pressing into the tense muscles. The silence was thick, charged with an unspoken electricity that was both frightening and alluring. As his hands moved down, one of Li Wei's hands reached out, his fingers brushing against Xiao Han's. It was a fleeting touch, but it was enough to make Xiao Han jump, his body swaying and losing balance. He fell forward, a desperate attempt to catch himself leading him to brace his hands on Li Wei's chest. The sudden lurch sent him stumbling, and in a heart-stopping moment their lips met. It was a soft, hesitant touch, a shocking meeting of two mouths, and in that split second, Xiao Han felt a warmth and a spark that had nothing to do with fear. He pulled back as if he'd been burned, his face a hot, crimson mask of embarrassment. Li Wei's expression was unreadable, but a slow, satisfied smirk spread across his face as he watched Xiao Han's reaction. The next morning, the tension in the office was suffocating as usual. Xiao Han had just placed Li Wei's coffee on his desk when his phone buzzed. It was a call from his college friend. Xiao Han moved a short distance away, his voice hushed and low. "I'm telling you, I'm fine," he whispered into the phone, a gentle smile on his lips. "It's just a lot to handle." He laughed softly at a comment from the other end. "I miss you too. I can't wait to see you again. I promise. I love you." From his office, Li Wei's face hardened, his jaw tightening as he watched Xiao Han. The gentle smile on his face, the soft, intimate tone of his voice, the casual "I miss you." It was everything Li Wei had been denied. The possessive fire in his eyes flared to life. "Xiao Han." Li Wei's voice boomed through the office, a cold, angry sound that made everyone jump. Xiao Han quickly ended the call, his face pale. He rushed to Li Wei's desk. Li Wei's eyes were cold and full of a furious, icy rage. He grabbed the documents Xiao Han was holding and threw them onto the floor, the papers scattering everywhere. "Are you getting paid to stand around talking on the phone?" he sneered, his voice dripping with venom. "Your love life is not my problem. My business is." He pointed a finger at the scattered papers, his voice a low, terrifying command. "Pick them up. And from now on, you'll leave your phone in the car." The week that followed was a slow, agonizing descent into loneliness. The employees in the office no longer whispered, they simply gave Xiao Han a wide berth, their silence louder than any words. He felt like a ghost, his existence acknowledged only by Li Wei and the cold, unfeeling tasks he was given. The weight of his confinement was immense, a heavy chain that he felt at all times, even in the gilded cage of the penthouse. He missed his friends, the simple comfort of a phone call. One afternoon, a young intern, a new hire named Jia, approached his desk. She was timid, her eyes darting around as if afraid of being seen. "Here," she whispered, pushing a small bag of pastries toward him. She scurried away before Xiao Han could even thank her. A strange warmth spread through him. He knew it was an act of kindness, but he found it strange that it came from that lady. Meanwhile, a different kind of turmoil raged within Li Wei. The memory of their accidental kiss was a constant, unwelcome intruder in his mind. In the middle of a board meeting, he would find himself replaying the moment, the surprising softness of Xiao Han's lips, the quick, terrified flutter in his eyes. He would look at Xiao Han's nervous frame across the office, and the anger he felt would morph into a confusing, possessive desire. He hated that he couldn't stop thinking about him. He despised the way his body reacted to the image of him. That night, after a day of silent suffering, the frustration and hurt finally bubbled over. Once they were alone in the penthouse, Xiao Han cornered Li Wei, his hands balled into fists, his body trembling. "Why?" he said, his voice a strained whisper. "Why do you hate me so much? You humiliated me today, you took my phone, and you won't even tell me why." What did I do wrong? Was it the shirt? I'm trying to pay you back, but you treat me like I'm nothing. First you kiss me, and then you treat me like a piece of trash. I don't understand. His voice broke, the tears he had been holding back all day finally starting to well up in his eyes. He took a step back, ready for Li Wei's usual sneer, but it never came. Li Wei just stared at him, his face an unreadable mask of cold fury and raw desire. He closed the distance between them, and with a sudden, forceful move, his hand cupped the back of Xiao Han's head. He went in for a kiss. It was not a gentle, hesitant touch like before. This was a claiming, a desperate, bruising kiss that stole all the air from Xiao Han's lungs. It was a kiss that said, "I own you." Li Wei's lips were firm, his tongue demanding, a fiery possession that completely overwhelmed Xiao Han's senses. When he finally pulled away, his eyes were a dark, burning abyss. He held Xiao Han by the shoulders, his thumbs rubbing circles on his collarbone, his voice low and possessive. "You're mine. Your whole body is mine." After the kiss, the air in the penthouse was thick with a new, dangerous electricity. Xiao Han was a mess of conflicting emotions. The fear was still there, a constant companion, but it was now mixed with a confusing warmth that spread through his veins. The kiss, so brutal and demanding, had also been filled with a raw intensity that made his mind race. He was trying to reconcile the cold-hearted man who had humiliated him with the one who had kissed him as if his life depended on it. Across from him, Li Wei was the picture of calm. He wasn't angry anymore, he was serene. He was proud. He had been on the verge of losing control, of going mad with a desire he couldn't name. But the kiss had silenced the chaos, settling the frantic storm in his mind. He had finally claimed what he wanted, and a terrifying peace had settled within him. He watched Xiao Han, a possessive glint in his eyes that dared him to feel anything other than what he had just given him. The next morning, the new dynamic was clear. Li Wei didn't ask, he commanded. "We are leaving together." Xiao Han, his body still trembling with the memory of the night before, walked beside him. He felt every eye in the lobby on them. He was a small, blonde-haired figure next to the powerful, dark-haired man who owned the building. He felt shy and exposed, every step a public declaration he wasn't ready to make. Li Wei's hand was placed gently but firmly on the small of his back, a brand of ownership. When the elevator doors closed, cutting them off from the world, Li Wei's composure broke. He pinned Xiao Han against the wall, a hungry look in his eyes. He went in for another kiss, one that was not a mistake, but a deliberate, consuming act. His lips were more demanding this time, his tongue tangling with Xiao Han's as his hand threaded through his blonde hair. The kiss was deep, passionate, and overwhelming, a silent promise of all the things he had just claimed. Their relationship continued for days, the morning kiss in the elevator becoming a silent, passionate ritual. Li Wei's possessiveness was his new way of showing affection. He would pull Xiao Han closer in meetings, his hand on his back or thigh under the table. He would send Xiao Han cryptic messages throughout the day that were not about work. And Xiao Han, confused but also feeling a strange, intoxicating pull, found himself falling deeper into the gilded cage. He was no longer afraid of Li Wei, he was simply afraid of being without him. But all the secret affection and public ownership came crashing down on a Friday afternoon. As Xiao Han was picking up files from the secretary's desk, he overheard a low, excited whisper. "Did you hear?" the secretary said to a coworker, her voice barely contained. "Li Wei's fiancé is in town. The heir to the Su family." The arranged marriage is happening soon. It's a huge business alliance. 3 days later, the air in the office crackled with a new kind of tension. A hush fell over the room as a woman walked in with the self-assured grace of royalty. Her dress was couture, her hair a perfect cascade of dark silk. She moved with a confidence that made even the most senior employees straighten up. She was Su Mei, the heir to the Su family, and the woman everyone knew was Li Wei's fiancée. She walked directly to Li Wei's office, her face lighting up with a practiced smile. She tried to hug him, but Li Wei subtly sidestepped, turning the motion into a gentle pat on her shoulder. The act, though seemingly polite, was a quiet rebuff. Su Mei, unbothered, simply smiled. "Darling," she said, her voice a sweet, confident melody, "I need to get a new wardrobe for the gala. You'll come with me, won't you?" It was not a request, it was a demand. Li Wei's eyes briefly flickered to where Xiao Han was standing, a silent command to disappear. Then, he turned back to Su Mei, a polite smile on his face. "Of course," he said, his voice as smooth as ever. Xiao Han stood frozen, the papers in his hand a meaningless blur. He watched them leave together, a perfect couple, their power and status on full display for everyone to see. In that moment, the lavish life he had been living, the whispered kisses in the elevator, the possessive touches, it all crumbled. He was nothing but an errand boy, a fleeting diversion for a man who had a life he could never be a part of. The world he had just built with Li Wei shattered into a million painful pieces. Li Wei did not return to the office until after closing hours. Xiao Han, a hollow ache in his chest, went back to the penthouse. The place felt like a cage, more suffocating than ever. He grabbed his phone and, in a moment of desperate defiance, turned it on. The screen lit up with a slew of missed calls and messages from his family. He quickly called his mother, and his heart dropped. She had been sick, had needed him, and he hadn't been there. He didn't even pack his things. He just grabbed a small bag, his mind racing. He had to go home. He had to escape. Li Wei came back to the penthouse to find it empty and silent. The silence was not peaceful, it was a cold, furious vacuum that sent a jolt of panic through him. He called Xiao Han's phone, but it was already disconnected. He called his driver, his security, everyone. He went crazy, tearing through the penthouse, a man possessed by a single, terrifying thought: he had lost him again. He drove like a madman to Xiao Han's family home, his heart a frantic drumbeat of anger and desperation. He burst through the front door, his eyes immediately finding Xiao Han, who was sitting with his head in his hands. Li Wei took a step forward, his own panic making him act without thinking. He reached out and grabbed Xiao Han's face, trying to kiss him, to claim him, to calm the wild fury within him. But Xiao Han's hands shot up, pushing Li Wei's chest with a newfound strength. "Stop it," he said, his voice sharp and clear. "Don't touch me. We should stop this. Whatever this is, we should stop it." Li Wei stared at him, his face contorting into a mask of rage and hurt. "What are you talking about?" "I'm going to move back here," Xiao Han said, his voice firm, "and I'll only serve you at the office. We can continue this arrangement, but only at the office. This other thing." He didn't get to finish. Li Wei's eyes blazed with a possessive fury. He grabbed Xiao Han by the arm, and with a wild, angry grunt, he lifted him off his feet, slinging him over his shoulder. "No," he growled, his voice a low, terrifying command. "You're not going anywhere." He ignored Xiao Han's protests and his family's frantic cries, walking out of the house with him slung over his shoulder, a human possession he was not willing to share. Li Wei carried Xiao Han into the penthouse, the thumping of his own heart and the frantic squirming of the boy over his shoulder the only sounds in the suffocating silence. He was a force of nature, a hurricane of fury and possession. He kicked the door shut behind him, setting Xiao Han down on the floor as if he were a precious, fragile object. He immediately went for him, his lips pressing hard against Xiao Han's mouth, a desperate attempt to reclaim what he had just lost. But Xiao Han pushed him away, his hands against Li Wei's chest, his eyes wide with fear and hurt. Li Wei grabbed his face, forcing him to look at him. He rained countless kisses on his forehead, his cheeks, his jaw, each one a silent plea. "How could you?" Li Wei's voice was a low growl, devoid of any pleading. His anger wasn't about the fiancé, but about the betrayal. "How could you leave me? We had something real here. After everything, you just run away? You leave me a note as if I'm nothing to you?" Xiao Han's chest heaved. He had no words. He couldn't speak. He could only feel the crushing weight of Li Wei's power, his hands still against Li Wei's chest in a futile attempt to keep him away. He couldn't understand. Why was Li Wei acting this way? He had a fiancé, a real-life fiancé who had just appeared out of nowhere. "I hate you." Xiao Han screamed, the words tearing from his throat, "I hate you." The words were a mix of anger and heartbroken rage. Something in Li Wei snapped. The anger and hurt drained from his face, replaced by a terrifying, cold calm. He stepped back, a single, dark look in his eyes. He slowly wiped a tear from Xiao Han's cheek, his touch surprisingly gentle. "I see," he said, his voice as cold as ice. "You hate me. Fine. If you want to play a game, we'll play one. You wanted to know what I could do? You want to know what it feels like to be without me? I'll show you. And when I'm done, you'll beg for my attention." He looked at Xiao Han's tear-streaked face and a chilling smirk appeared on his face. "I'm going to make you so jealous, you won't know what hit you. I'm going to parade her around. The media, the parties, the whole city is going to know that I'm with her, that I'm with Su Mei. I'll make you watch us. You will see what you've lost, and you will come back." He turned and walked away, a new, calculated kind of fury in his stride. The game was on. The engagement party would be announced tomorrow. The words "I'm going to make you so jealous" echoed in Xiao Han's mind, a chilling promise from Li Wei. Alone in the penthouse, he was a storm of conflicting emotions. A cold wave of fear washed over him, fear of losing Li Wei, the man who had terrified and now claimed him. But with that fear came a deep, aching hurt. She was a woman. The world accepted that. He was a man. What could he offer? A family, a future, an heir? He had nothing to offer. He was just a boy with no money and no future, a man with a sick mother. The thought of his mom sent a new wave of panic through him. How would he help her from here? How could he make money? The gilded cage had become a suffocating prison. The next day, Li Wei's cruel game began. He and Su Mei were a spectacle of effortless elegance, shopping at the city's most exclusive boutiques. But Li Wei was always aware of one person, the silent figure holding his fiancée's endless shopping bags. Xiao Han was a ghost at their side, his face a mask of practiced politeness as he trailed them, his arms aching with the weight of her purchases. He couldn't look away, and Li Wei's eyes, even as he was a vision of charm for Su Mei, never left him. When Su Mei laughed and kissed Li Wei on the cheek, a public display of affection meant for the cameras and passers-by, Xiao Han's heart ached. He watched Li Wei's face, cold and unmoving, and then, as he turned his head to look at a dress, Li Wei's hand came up and subtly wiped the spot where she had kissed him. The act was so quick, so discreet, that no one but Xiao Han could have seen it. It was a cold, silent message, *, this is not real. You are, *. The nights were worse. Li Wei's penthouse, once a quiet and lonely place, became a revolving door of handsome men. Each night, a new face. An artist, a model, a lawyer. Li Wei would parade them around, his hand on their backs, his laughter loud and genuine, a stark contrast to the quiet rage Xiao Han had grown accustomed to. He would act so loving and sweet, making sure to do so in full view of Xiao Han. And always, the men would order Xiao Han around. Get me a drink, waiter. Fetch my coat. They treated him like a servant, and Li Wei did nothing to correct them. He would just watch, his eyes fixed on the flicker of hurt in Xiao Han's expression. Xiao Han would retreat to his room, his heart a hollow, broken thing. He would fall onto his bed, burying his face in his pillow, and cry. The tears would come without sound, a silent, desperate weeping that spoke of his loneliness and despair. He didn't know that every single tear, every single sob, every broken whisper of his own pain was being watched. He had no idea that a secret camera was installed in his room, giving Li Wei a front-row seat to his suffering. In the mornings, Li Wei would see the puffy eyes and the tired face, and something in his own would soften. He would take a step towards Xiao Han, his hand lifting as if to reach out and comfort him. But he would stop himself. He would clench his fist, a flicker of cold determination in his eyes. He had made a promise. And he had to see it through. The climax of this cruel charade came on a Tuesday night. With a press conference filled with flashing lights and 100 cameras, Li Wei announced his engagement to Su Mei, a final, crushing blow to the man who was watching from the sidelines. The engagement announcement was the final, crushing blow. Xiao Han didn't scream or cry, he simply went numb. The game was over, and he had lost everything. He called his mother, his voice a hollow whisper, and told her he was coming home. His parents, understanding his unspoken desperation, had already made arrangements. He had to disappear. He packed a single bag, and without a word, he was gone, a ghost in the vast, empty penthouse. With his parents' help, he relocated to a different city, a place where he could finally be invisible. Meanwhile, a furious Li Wei returned home, the silence of the penthouse a mockery of his power. He searched every room, his rage building with every empty closet and every untouched item. He drove to Xiao Han's family home, his heart a frantic drumbeat of fury, but he found it empty. A cold, terrifying calm settled over Li Wei. He returned to his company, not as a CEO but as a madman with a singular purpose. He summoned his secret tech team, a group of brilliant minds working on a highly advanced facial recognition AI. Find him, Li Wei commanded, his voice cold and unwavering as he handed them a picture of Xiao Han. I don't care about the launch. Find him now. The AI, a silent and merciless hunter, took only minutes. A name, an address, a city. The location was revealed. Li Wei, armed with this knowledge, went to him. He found Xiao Han in a quiet cafe, his head bent over a book. He walked in, a furious look on his face, a man on the brink of losing control. How could you leave me, he said, his voice a low growl. After everything, how could you leave me? Xiao Han's eyes widened in fear, but Li Wei didn't give him a chance to speak. He grabbed him and led him out, pulling him into his car. He drove back to the penthouse, the silence in the car broken only by the sound of his ragged breathing. This time, there would be no more running. That night, Li Wei made good on his promise. He took Xiao Han, his desperate hunger for him consuming him entirely. The act was not violent, but it was absolute. It was a complete and utter claiming. Li Wei was not a lover, he was a possessor. He kissed every inch of Xiao Han's skin, his hands mapping his body as if he were trying to memorize every curve, every dip. It was a silent, desperate declaration that left Xiao Han trembling and broken, but also something else. In the midst of the passion, in the moments of vulnerability, a profound emotion began to bloom in Xiao Han's heart. He was no longer afraid of Li Wei, he was in love with him. He had fallen for the man who had terrified him, the man who had humiliated him, and the man who had just taken him. He was a moth to a flame, drawn to the fire that both burned and sustained him. But as the morning light crept into the penthouse, a cold, harsh reality set in. Their love, born from passion and possessiveness, was a secret that could never be. Li Wei was an engaged man. The entire world knew it. The morning sun filtered through the vast windows of the penthouse, casting a golden light on the two men in the bed. Xiao Han, his head resting on Li Wei's chest, felt a calm he had never known before. The fear that had been his constant companion for weeks had finally given way to a quiet, terrifying love. He was in love with a man who had abducted him, humiliated him, and then claimed him. It was a terrifying, confusing truth he was just beginning to accept. Li Wei's voice, when he spoke, was soft, a stark contrast to the growl from the night before. "I'm going to call off the engagement," he said, his hand stroking Xiao Han's hair. "I'll deal with my family, with the company. I'll make this public. I want everyone to know you're mine." He then laid out his plan. A new apartment for Xiao Han's family, the best doctors for his mother, and a private account with enough money to make sure they never had to worry again. Xiao Han's heart swelled with a mix of gratitude and hope. This was it. This was the man he had seen flashes of, the man who would take care of him, the man who was worth fighting for. The next day, Xiao Han went to work with a new sense of purpose. He was no longer just a servant, he was the man who held Li Wei's heart. He watched with a nervous excitement as Su Mei entered the office, her heels clicking against the marble floor. Xiao Han's heart pounded in his chest. This is it, he thought. This is when he does it. But there was no grand announcement. Li Wei smiled politely at Su Mei, a cold, formal smile. He held her arm, escorted her to his office, and closed the door behind him. For an hour, he was gone. When he emerged, he was all business. He never mentioned the engagement, never mentioned calling it off. He simply continued with his day as if nothing had changed. Xiao Han watched, his hope slowly crumbling. The lie was still there, a great, cold chasm between them. At night, Li Wei would return home and pull him into his arms, his love and passion a stark contrast to the cold indifference he had shown in the office. He would spend the entire night loving him, whispering words of devotion that contradicted his every public action. The lies, however, were not lost on Su Mei. She had heard the whispers about Li Wei's strange behavior. She had seen the way his eyes would flicker to Xiao Han. And after he left her at the door with a cold kiss on the cheek, she began to put the pieces together. Something was wrong. Her perfectly arranged life was not in order. A deep suspicion settled in her heart. She wasn't just going to let it go. She was going to find out what was happening. Her private car pulled away from Li Wei's office, but she didn't go home. She went to his penthouse, a bold move meant to get the answers she needed. She was coming to find the truth, and she was going to expose the man who was lying to her. The elevator doors to the penthouse opened with a soft chime. Su Mei stepped out, her face a mask of cold suspicion. She moved with a purpose that was both elegant and furious, her hand already on the handle of Li Wei's private bedroom door. She didn't bother to knock. The door swung open, revealing the sight she had come to find. Li Wei and Xiao Han, bare-chested in the bed, the blankets pulled low. They weren't in the act, but the intimacy in the air was 1,000 times more damning. The sight of the delicate blonde-haired boy next to her fiancé sent a wave of icy fury through her. She didn't scream. She simply overreacted with a chilling, theatrical calm. "I knew it," she said, her voice a sharp whisper that cut through the silence. She turned to Li Wei, her eyes burning with rage. "You disgust me." Then her eyes found Xiao Han, and they hardened into daggers. "I'll give you a choice, Li Wei. You send him away, now, and never contact him again. And I will forgive you. If you don't." A terrifying smile spread across her face. "Then I will use every ounce of my family's power to make sure this boy and his family are ruined. I will make sure he never works again. He will wish he had never met you." Li Wei's face was a mask of cold fury. He looked from the venomous woman in the doorway to the trembling boy in his bed. He knew he had no choice. He had to save Xiao Han. He looked at Xiao Han with a coldness that felt like a betrayal. "Get dressed," he said, his voice hard. "You're fired. Get out of my sight and don't contact me again." He had to break Xiao Han's heart to save him. Xiao Han's face crumbled. He felt the coldness of Li Wei's voice, the finality of his words. He was just a thing after all. He was a plaything that had served its purpose, and now he was being discarded. He got dressed, his hands trembling, and left the penthouse, the doors closing behind him on the man he had foolishly, dangerously, fallen in love with. Xiao Han returned to his family's home, a broken shell of a man. He cried every night, a silent, heartbroken weeping into his pillow, mourning the man who had loved him and then destroyed him. He didn't know that Li Wei, despite his cold exterior, had already made a move. From a distance, he sent money to a trust fund in Xiao Han's name, enough to ensure he and his family would live in comfort for the rest of their lives. He hired a private security team, a ghost-like shadow that watched over Xiao Han's every move, making sure he was safe, even if he couldn't be with him. The wedding date was fixed. A grand ceremony with 1,000 guests and every major media outlet in the country. Li Wei stood on the stage next to Su Mei, a perfect picture of a successful man with a perfect wife. The world saw a man getting what he wanted. But beneath the facade, his eyes were empty. He was a man who had everything he was supposed to want, but he had given up the one thing he truly loved. He was a rich man standing next to his fiancée, but a part of him was a poor man standing alone. He had won the battle, but he had lost the war. The day of the wedding arrived like a funeral. The air was thick with the scent of white roses, and the sound of hushed whispers filled the grand hall. Li Wei, dressed in a custom-made suit, stood at the altar, a cold, empty look in his eyes. He wasn't marrying Su Mei, he was burying a threat. He was getting revenge for the woman who had dared to use Xiao Han's life against him. This entire grand spectacle was a carefully orchestrated humiliation, a warning to her and her powerful family that they were nothing compared to him. Meanwhile, a car pulled up to Xiao Han's quiet family home. Two of Li Wei's bodyguards stepped out, their expressions grim but respectful. They told a bewildered and terrified Xiao Han that he had to come with them. They dressed him in a pristine white suit that fit him perfectly, as if it had been made just for him. His heart was a frantic bird in a cage, his mind a jumble of questions. He was driven to the wedding venue, confused and heartbroken, only to be led to the very back of the hall, a silent, heartbroken witness to the greatest betrayal of his life. The guests were hushed, the lights were bright, and Su Mei was a vision of elegant, triumphant beauty as she smiled at her groom. The officiant began to speak. "Li Wei, do you take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife?" The question hung in the air, but Li Wei didn't answer. He looked at Su Mei, a cold, empty smile on his face. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice loud and clear, echoing through the silent hall. "I cannot." A gasp rippled through the crowd. Su Mei's smile faltered, her face contorting in shock. Li Wei turned away from her, his eyes scanning the crowd, a furious, triumphant hunger in them. He found Xiao Han, standing at the back of the hall, and his voice, when he spoke, was a powerful, public declaration that silenced the entire hall. "I will not marry a woman. Because I am in love with a man." He strode towards Xiao Han, his cold mask melting away, his eyes filled with a raw, desperate love. He took Xiao Han's hand and led him to the stage, to the very spot where he was supposed to marry Su Mei. "Xiao Han," he said, his voice thick with emotion, his eyes pleading. "I am sorry. Everything I did, the humiliation, the lies, the pain, it was all a game. A game to teach her a lesson. I had to protect you from her threats. I had to break your heart to save your life. I love you, and I have always loved you." He pulled a stunning ring from his pocket, a ring that had been meant for Su Mei. Xiao Han, tears streaming down his face, accepted the ring. He finally understood. This was not a betrayal, it was a sacrifice. He looked at Li Wei, the man who had loved him enough to hurt him. Their love was a painful, complicated thing. It was their own. "I love you," Xiao Han whispered, and Li Wei pulled him into a passionate, hungry kiss that was witnessed by thousands. The kiss was a silent vow, a public declaration of a love that was stronger than power, fame, and threats. Their lives changed in an instant. The photos of their passionate kiss covered the front pages of magazines, including Vogue. They became the #1 trending topic in the world, a symbol of love's triumph over all. They adopted a son, a quiet, gentle boy, and Li Wei dedicated his life to teaching everyone who had ever wronged Xiao Han a lesson. He made it clear to the world that no one was ever to lust after Xiao Han. Xiao Han became not just a partner, but a life partner. And in the end, Li Wei and Xiao Han were not just a love story. They were a perfect happy ending.